Good evening, and welcome back to Whispers Before Sleep. I'm truly grateful you've chosen to spend these quiet moments with me. Whether today felt long, whether your heart feels full, or perhaps a little heavy, I hope tonight's story gives you a place to rest. So settle into your favorite blanket, take a slow, gentle breath, and allow yourself to leave the noise of the day behind. Tonight, we'll visit a small railway station where every Sunday, one train arrives, one train departs, and one quiet promise has been kept for many years. This is the train that waited every Sunday. There are stations that thousands of people pass through every day. Busy stations, noisy stations, stations where no one remembers your face. But hidden between two quiet mountains, there was a station so small that only six trains stopped there each day. Its name was Maple Hollow Station. Most travelers never noticed it. Those who did rarely stayed longer than 5 minutes, except every Sunday. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, one elderly woman arrived carrying the same small leather suitcase. She never boarded the train. She never met anyone. She simply sat on the same wooden bench and watched train 47 arrive. For 18 years, no one knew why, except one man, the station master. Every Sunday, long before the church bells finished ringing, Mr. Thomas Bennett would begin preparing Maple Hollow Station for the afternoon trains. At 72 years old, he had been the station master for nearly 4 decades. He knew every creaking floorboard, every bird that nested beneath the roof, every child who waved at passing trains. His station was quiet, and he prepared it that way. Each morning, he swept the platform himself, not because he had to, but because he believed every traveler deserved to arrive somewhere that felt cared for. Shortly before 4 o'clock, he always looked toward the old oak tree beside the station entrance. Without fail, she would appear. An elderly woman wearing a light blue coat, her silver hair neatly tucked between a small hat. In one hand, she carried a weathered leather suitcase. In the other, a single white lily. She walked slowly, never rushed, never late. She nodded politely to Mr. Bennett. He tipped his cup. Neither of them spoke very much. She would sit on the third bench from the end of the platform. Always the third. Never the first. Never the second. And certainly never another. At precisely 4:15, train 47 would round the distance curve. Its whistle echoed gently across the valley. The train slowed. Passengers stepped off. Others climbed aboard. Families embraced. Friends laughed. Children pointed excitedly from the windows. The station came alive. For exactly 3 minutes, then the whistle sounded again. The train continued its journey. The platform grew quiet. The woman remained seated. She watched until the last carriage disappeared beyond the hills. Only then would she quietly stand, brush a few invisible specks of dust from her coat, pick up her little suitcase, and walk home. Every Sunday, for 18 years, people noticed. Of course they did. Some guessed she was waiting for a son. Others believed she had once missed an important train. A few imagined she simply enjoyed watching people travel. But none of them knew the truth. Mr. Bennet knew. Not because she had told him, but because sometimes silence tells a story words never can. One rainy Sunday, at the station emptied once again, Mr. Bennet carried 2 cups of hot tea to the old bench. Without asking, he sat beside her. The rain tapped gently against the platform roof. For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, she smiled. "You've been wandering for 18 years." Mr. Bennet chuckled softly. "I suppose I have." She looked toward the empty trucks. "My name is Eleanor." He nodded warmly. "Thomas." "I know." She smiled. "I've known for a very long time." The rain continued falling, gentle, steady, comforting. Then, almost in a whisper, Eleanor said the words that would change everything. "I'm waiting for someone who promised he'd return on train 47. She paused. "He kept every promise he ever made. So, I decided I'd keep mine too." Thomas looked at the quiet trucks. He didn't ask whether that person was still alive. He didn't ask what had happened. Some questions can wait. Some answers arrive only when the heart is ready. The distance clock struck 5. The station was empty once more. Yet somehow, neither of them felt alone. The following Sunday, Thomas found himself arriving earlier than usual, not because there was more work to do, but because for the first time in many years, he was looking forward to 4 o'clock. The station was wrapped in the golden light of early autumn. Leaves drifted lazily across the empty platform. Some settled between the rails. Others danced briefly in the breeze before disappearing down the tracks. Thomas smiled. Even the leaves seemed to be traveling today. He finished sweeping the platform just as the church bells echoed through the valley. Not long after, Eleanor appeared beneath the old oak tree. The same blue coat, the same graceful steps, the same weathered leather suitcase, and as always, a single white lily. She greeted him with a gentle smile. "Good afternoon, Thomas." "Good afternoon, Eleanor." This time, instead of waiting in silence, Thomas poured 2 cups of tea before she even reached the bench. She laughed softly. "I suppose this is becoming a habit. I hope you don't mind." "I don't. I spent many Sundays alone. It's nice having someone who doesn't rush the silence." For a while, they watched the birds gather near the trucks. One tiny sparrow hopped fearlessly between the wooden sleepers. Another perched on the station sign as if it owned the place. "It's funny," Eleanor whispered. "When we're young, we think silence means loneliness." She smiled toward the mountains. "But when we grow older, we discover silence can become a friend." Thomas nodded. "I used to fear retirement. I thought I'd miss the noise. Now, I find peace in hearing the wind." The station clock ticked softly above them. 4:10. Still 5 minutes before train 47. Thomas glanced toward the old suitcase resting neatly beside Eleanor's feet. Its leather had cracked with age. The brass clasps had lost their shine, One corner had been carefully stitched many years before. It looked as though it had traveled countless miles. Yet somehow, it had never been opened. Curiosity finally found its voice. "You've carried that suitcase every Sunday for 18 years. You've never once opened it." Eleanor rested her hand gently upon it. "No." "Would you like to know why?" Thomas hesitated. "Only if you'd like to tell me." She smiled. "That's why I decided to tell you." She slowly unclipped the worn brass locks. The hinges creaked softly. Thomas expected to see clothes, perhaps old photographs, maybe letters. Instead, the suitcase was almost empty. Inside lay only three things: a neatly folded wool scarf, an old pocket watch that no longer ticked, and a small paper train ticket. Thomas leaned closer. The ticket was faded almost white with age. Only a few words remained readable. "Maple Hollow, train 47, one passenger." He looked at Eleanor. She traced the edge of the ticket with her fingertips. "This was never used." Thomas frowned gently. "You never boarded?" She shook her head. "No." The whistle of a distant train echoed faintly through the valley. Still several minutes away, Eleanor continued. "It belonged to my husband. We were 24. He had accepted work in another city. He promised, wait for me every Sunday." Thomas listened quietly. He said the journey would only take a few months. He bought 2 tickets, one for himself and one for our first trip together after he returned. She smiled faintly. "I kept mine." He carried his. The sound of train 47 grew louder in the distance. He kissed my forehead, stepped aboard, and waved through the window until I couldn't see him anymore. Thomas noticed that Eleanor wasn't crying. Not anymore. Her voice carried peace instead of pain. "What happened?" The train rounded the distant curve. Steam drifted into the cool afternoon air. Passengers gathered. Children laughed. Suitcases rolled across the platform. Eleanor watched every face, every window, every carriage. Only after the train came to a complete stop. Did she answer? The bridge collapsed during a terrible storm. There were no survivors. The station became strangely quiet, even among the voices of travelers. Thomas lowered his eyes. "I'm so sorry." She smiled gently. "So was I. For many years." The conductor's whistle sounded. Doors closed. Passengers waved goodbye. The train slowly pulled away. As always, Eleanor watched until the final carriage disappeared beyond the bend. Then she looked at the old ticket once more. "I stopped waiting for him a long time ago." Thomas looked confused. "But you still come? Every Sunday?" She nodded. "Not because I believe he'll step off the train." She smiled toward the empty trucks. "I come because this is where I learned that love doesn't disappear when someone does. It simply changes the way it stays with us." The evening sun slipped lower behind the mountains. Its golden light painted the rails like ribbons of amber. Thomas looked down the endless tracks. For the first time, he realized Eleanor had never been waiting for a train. She had been honoring a promise, and perhaps some promises were never meant to end. The following Sunday, Thomas noticed something he had somehow overlooked for nearly 40 years. The large station clock above platform 1 was 3 minutes slow. It has always been. He smiled to himself. How curious. He climbed the small wooden ladder, intending to adjust it. Before his fingers reached the hands of the clock, a gentle voice called from below. I wouldn't. Thomas looked down. Eleanor was standing on the platform, smiling. You noticed? He climbed down carefully. I worked here for 39 years. I can't believe I never realized. She laughed softly. Oh, I think you realize. You simply stopped seeing it. Thomas looked up again. Shouldn't I fix it? Eleanor shook her head. Do you know why your predecessor never did? Thomas frowned. I didn't even know he had not. My husband once asked him the same questions. And do you know what he answered? Thomas smiled. What? Eleanor looked toward the mountains. He said, 3 minutes is enough time for someone running late to believe they still have hope. Thomas laughed. That's never very accurate. No, it isn't. But perhaps it was very kind. They both looked up at the old clock. Neither of them wanted it repaired anymore. That afternoon, a young mother hurried across the platform holding the hand of her little daughter. I'm sorry. I think we've missed it. Thomas checked the station clock. Not yet. 3 more minutes. The woman smiled with relief. Moments later, Train 47 appeared around the bend. She and her daughter climbed aboard just in time. As the train pulled away, the little girl pressed her hand against the window and waved enthusiastically. Thomas waved back. When the train disappeared, he turned toward Eleanor. She simply smiled. Sometimes, being 3 minutes behind means being exactly where someone needs you. Thomas glanced up at the old clock once more. For the first time in decades, he chose not to fix it. Some imperfections were acts of kindness. That evening, before locking the station, Thomas wrote a small note in his journal. Not everything that needs fixing is broken. He smiled as he closed the notebook. Perhaps he had just learned something from old clock. Rain fell gently the following Sunday, not enough to keep travelers away, just enough to make everything quieter. The platform glistened beneath the gray sky. Thomas had prepared tea before Eleanor arrived. She smiled as she accepted the warm cup. I began looking forward to Sundays. So have I. For a while, they simply listened to the rain. Then Thomas asked a question he had never expected to ask anyone. Do you ever write to him? Eleanor looked surprised. To your husband. She nodded slowly. I used to. She reached into her suitcase. This time, instead of the old ticket, she removed a bundle of envelopes tied together with faded blue ribbon. Thomas stared quietly. There must be hundreds. There are. I wrote one every Sunday for 18 years. He looked astonished. And mailed them? She smiled. No, I never addressed them. I simply wrote. Thomas gently held one of the envelopes. The handwriting had changed over the years. The earliest letters were neat and graceful. The latter ones trembled slightly with age. What did you write? Oh, everything. The weather, the flowers blooming outside our cottage, the first gray hair I discovered, the neighbors, the books I finished, the silly things I wish I could still tell him. Thomas looked down. You never stopped talking to him. No, I simply learned another way. She opened one envelope. Without reading the whole letter, she smiled at a single sentence. Today, I bake your favorite apple pie. She laughed softly. It burned. Thomas laughed too. I imagine he would have eaten it anyway. So would I. For a moment, the station disappeared. There was only rain, tea, and two old friends smiling over memories that belonged to someone else. Train 47 arrived. Passengers came and went. As always, life continued. When the station grew quiet again, Thomas spoke almost in a whisper. I wish I had written letters. Eleanor looked at him. To whom? My wife. She had been gone for 12 years. I spoke to her every day while she was alive. But after she died, I stopped. Perhaps because I believed talking meant pretending she was still here. Eleanor shook her head gently. No, talking means love is still here. There was a long silence. Not uncomfortable, not sad, simply thoughtful. Thomas looked toward the empty trucks. I think I will write my first letter tonight. Eleanor smiled. I think she'd like that. That evening, Thomas sat by the small window of his cottage. He unfolded a blank sheet of paper. For several minutes, he didn't know how to begin. Finally, he wrote only 6 words. Today, I made a new friend. He folded the letter carefully, placed it inside an envelope, and tucked it into the top drawer beside his bed. Some letters do not need stamps. They only need honesty. Winter arrived quietly. Each morning, Maple Hollow Station awoke beneath a blanket of silver frost. The mountains looked softer. The trees stood patiently, their branches bare against the pale blue sky. Even the train seemed to move more gently through the valley. One Sunday, just before noon, Thomas noticed a small boy sitting alone at the far end of the platform. He couldn't have been older than 8. He wore a knitted green scarf that seemed far too long for him. Its ends almost touching the ground. Balanced on his knees was a small notebook. Every time a train passed, he carefully wrote something down. Thomas approached with a warm smile. Good morning. The boy looked up. Good morning, sir. What are you writing? The child proudly opened his notebook. Every page was filled with tiny drawings of trains. Beside each drawing, he had written the time, the weather, and the number of passengers he had counted through the windows. Thomas chuckled. You're keeping better records than the railway company. The boy smiled shyly. My grandpa says every train has a story, so I write them down. Thomas knelt beside him. What's your name? Oliver. And your grandfather? The boy pointed toward a wooden bench beneath the station roof. An elderly man sat quietly reading a newspaper. Every now and then, he looked up just to make sure Oliver was still smiling. Thomas nodded. You have a wise grandfather. Oliver looked toward the trucks. I think trains are like people. Thomas tilted his head. How so? They're always going somewhere, even if they had to stop for a little while. Thomas smiled. Children sometimes understood life better than adults. A little later, Eleanor arrived. Oliver noticed the white lily in her hand. That's a beautiful flower. Thank you. Is it for someone? Eleanor looked toward the rails. Yes, my husband. Oliver thought for a moment, then asked the kind of question only children could ask. Does he still like flowers? Thomas quietly held his breath, but Eleanor only smiled. I think he always will. Oliver nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. He carefully removed a tiny daisy from his coat pocket. I picked this for my grandma, but he hesitated. You can have it. Eleanor accepted the little flower with both hands. As long as, she smiled warmly, you promised to pick another one for your grandma. I will. 2 flowers are always better than one. Oliver grinned. Before running back to his grandfather, he turned around. My grandpa says, the people we miss are happiest when we're still kind. Eleanor watched him disappear down the platform. A tear slid quietly down her cheek. Not because she was sad, but because sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. That afternoon, when train 47 finally arrived, Thomas noticed something different. Eleanor placed both flowers on the empty bench beside her, the white lily and the little daisy. One for yesterday, one for today. As the train disappeared into the mountains, she smiled. Perhaps healing didn't always arrive with great moments. Sometimes it came carrying muddy boots, a knitted scarf, and a child's simple kindness. As winter slowly gave way to spring, the old oak tree beside Maple Hollow Station began to bloom once more. Tiny green leaves appeared on its branches. Birds returned to build their nest. The station seemed to breathe again. One Sunday, Thomas arrived carrying a small wooden toolbox. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. I hope you're not finally fixing the clock. Thomas laughed. No, I've learned my lesson. He walked toward the old bench where Eleanor always sat. Its paint had faded. One armrest had begun to loosen. The wood had become rough after many seasons of rain and snow. I thought it deserved a little care. Together, they sanded the old wood until it became smooth again. Oliver insisted on helping. Though most of the paint somehow ended up on his own sleeves, his grandfather only laughed. I suppose the bench was not the only thing getting restored today. By late afternoon, the bench looks almost new. Not perfect, its age still showed. Its grain was uneven. One corner remained chipped, but somehow, it seemed more beautiful than before. Thomas stepped back. There! Eleanor gently ran her hand across the polished wood. You did not make it new. No, I only helped it keep telling its story. She smiled. I think that's what kindness is. Not erasing someone's scars, but reminding them they can still be useful. Oliver sat proudly in the middle of the bench. I think it's the best bench in the whole world. Thomas laughed. It might be. After all, it had carried 18 years of promises. Hundreds of quiet Sundays, countless cups of tea, and now, the laughter of a little boy. As the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the platform, Train 47 arrived once again. Passengers stepped off. Others climbed aboard. Some smiled, some hurried. Some looked tired, some looked hopeful. Life continued, exactly as it always had. Yet somehow, everything felt different. Thomas realized it was not the station that had changed, it was him. For years, he had believed his job was simply to watch trains arrive and depart. Now he understood. His true work had always been something quieter, to welcome every traveler, to notice those who sat alone, to offer warmth before someone asked for it, to remind people, even for a few moments, that they mattered. As the train disappeared beyond the valley, the evening breeze stirred the branches of the old oak tree. Tiny leaves danced gently through the air. Oliver caught one before it reached the ground. He tucked it carefully into his notebook. "I won't forget today." Thomas looked toward Eleanor. She smiled. "You won't." Some days stay with us forever. The station clock chimed softly. Still, 3 minutes slow. And no one dare wish it any other way. Spring had painted Maple Hollow in a gentle shades of green. Wild flowers lined the edge of the railway. Bird song greeted the first morning train. Everything seemed exactly as it always had, except one Sunday. Eleanor did not come. Thomas glanced toward the old oak tree. 4 o'clock. No blue coat. No leather suitcase. No white lily. He smiled to himself. Perhaps she's simply running late. He prepared 2 cups of tea anyway. The steam drifted quietly into the cool afternoon air. 4:10. Still no Eleanor. Train 47 rounded the distance curve. Passengers stepped down. Families embraced. Children laughed. The familiar 3 minutes passed. The train continued its journey. The platform became quiet once again. Thomas looked toward the empty bench. The untouched cup of tea had begun to cool. For the first time in many months, the station felt unusually large. Not because it had changed, but because one familiar presence was missing. Oliver wandered over. "She's not here today?" Thomas nodded. "No." The little boy sat beside him. "Do you think she's all right?" "I hope so." Neither of them spoke after that. Sometimes, hope sounds exactly like silence. The following Sunday, Eleanor was still absent. Thomas folded another white lily in a damp cloth and placed it gently beside the second cup of tea. He didn't know why. It simply felt right. As the afternoon faded, an unfamiliar woman stepped onto the platform. She looked around before approaching Thomas. "Are you Mr. Bennett?" "I am." She smiled gently. "My name is Sarah. I'm Eleanor's niece." Thomas stood quietly. Sarah held the old leather suitcase. "I thought you should know. Aunt Eleanor passed away peacefully 3 days ago." The wind stirred softly through the station. Thomas removed his cap. Neither he nor Oliver spoke. Sarah continued. "Before she left, she asked me to bring this to you." She placed the suitcase in Thomas' hands, and she said, "Tell Thomas that I finally caught my train." Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, not to hide tears, but to hold on to her words. Sometimes, goodbyes arrived with sorrow. but also with peace. That evening, after the station had fallen quiet, Thomas carried the suitcase into his small office. He placed it gently upon the wooden desk, the same brass clasp, the same worn leather, the same careful stitches. Slowly, he opened it. Inside, the old pocket watch rested exactly where he remembered. Beside it lay the faded train ticket. But there was something else, a small envelope. On the front, only 4 words. For my friend Thomas. His hands trembled slightly. He unfolded the letter. My dear Thomas, thank you for making the last years of my journey feel less lonely. I came to the station to keep a promise, but I stayed because I found a friend. If one Sunday I no longer arrive, please don't be sad. It simply means another journey has begun. There is one last promise I hope you'll keep for me. Leave one white lily on the bench every first Sunday of spring. Not for me, but for everyone who has ever waited for someone they loved. Love should always leave something beautiful behind. And Thomas, don't stop making tea for strangers. You never know who needs kindness more than conversation. With gratitude, Eleanor. Thomas carefully folded the letter. Outside, the station clock chimed. Still 3 minutes slow. He smiled through quiet tears. I won't fix it. The seasons continued to turn. Summer became autumn. Autumn welcomed winter. Winter slowly returned to spring. On the first Sunday of spring, Thomas walked to the familiar bench carrying a single white lily. Oliver, now a little taller, walked beside him. Is today the day? Thomas nodded. It is. Together, they placed the flower gently upon the polished bench. Passenger noticed. Some paused. Some smiled. One elderly gentleman quietly removed his hat. A young woman placed a daisy beside the lily. Another traveler added a handwritten note. Without anyone planning it, the bench slowly filled with flowers. Not only for Eleanor, but for mothers, fathers, grandparents, friends, children. Everyone somehow still carried in their heart. Oliver looked around in amazement. They are all remembering someone. Thomas smiled. Yes. And because they remember, those people are still changing the world. The breeze carried the scent of blossoms across the station. For a moment, the platform felt full. Not of crowds, but of love. Years passed. Thomas eventually retired from Maple Hollow Station. On his final afternoon, the railway company held a small ceremony. They offered speeches, a polished plaque, a gold watch. Thomas thanked them kindly. But before leaving, he walked alone to the old bench beneath the oak tree. It had aged again, just as benches should. Children still sat there. Travelers still rested there. Flowers still appeared every first Sunday of spring. The station clock still ran 3 minutes slow. No one had ever repaired it. And somehow, everyone prepared it that way. Thomas sat quietly. The afternoon train echoed across the valley. Train 47. Just as always. As it slowed into the station, he closed his eyes. He could almost hear Eleanor's gentle voice. 3 minutes is enough time for hope. He smiled. Perhaps that had always been the secret of Maple Hollow. Not the trains, not the station, not even the bench. It was the people who chose kindness, who noticed the lonely, who remembered the forgotten, who believed that even the smallest gesture could brighten someone's journey. As the train departed one final time, Thomas stood. He touched the back of the old bench, straightened his cup, and began the walk home. Not with sadness, but with gratitude, because every meaningful journey eventually teaches us that the destination was never the most important part. It was the people who walked beside us along the way. Before you close your eyes tonight, think of someone who once waited for you. Perhaps it was a parent waiting by the window, a grandparent listening for the sound of your footsteps, a friend who stayed until you were ready to smile again, or someone who believed in you long before you believe in yourself. If they are still with you, tell them what they mean to you. If they are no longer here, carry their kindness into tomorrow, because love has a beautiful way of continuing whenever we choose to give it away. Thank you for spending this quiet evening with me. I hope tonight's story brought you a little peace, a little comfort, and perhaps reminded you of someone who will always have a place in your heart. Until we meet again, may your thoughts grow lighter, may your heart rest easy, and may your dreams carry you gently toward a brighter tomorrow. Good night, sleep well, and remember, some journeys never truly end. They simply continue in the hearts of those who remember.